Okay, today we're going to be diving into technical session number 26 and get our introduction into mobile devices, although there is a pretty wide variety of those particular types. For the purposes of the A+, they do not necessarily consider a laptop a mobile device. That is its own separate category. So you have desktops, laptops, and mobile devices. So they are distinctly different. So throughout the course of this technical session, we should be able to identify mobile devices and explain what qualifies them as a mobile device. Typically, it has to do with size and a few other characteristics. We should be able to describe the characteristics of common mobile devices, including tablets, phones, e-readers, and the like. Compare and contrast the software platforms, capabilities, accessories, and mobile ports of different mobile devices, and describe the role of mobile devices in today's society. All right, for this particular technical session, we'll be wanting to focus on adaptability. As the market is constantly changing, new devices are being introduced on a pretty regular basis. Things are continually changing. We have to adapt, learn about these new devices, how to help our clients with them, and be aware of these devices and how to work on them. So we have to constantly be learning, adapting, and changing with our environment. Also, we need to maintain future orientation. As you know, we talked about earlier, what is the difference between a job and a career? You know, a job is what you're doing now. A career is what you are looking to become. So if you want to become an administrator, understand the positions between where you are now and an actual, full-blown administrator. What types of jobs and positions do you need to take to get to that point? So you need to find some point where you want to go and develop a plan to get there, and the types of jobs you'll need to have under your belt in order to be successful in those roles. All right, so what exactly is a mobile device? Basic definition, mobile device is a small, portable, electronic device that enables computing. As mobile devices have improved in capability, their use and need for technical support has increased. Mobile devices use one of three software platforms: iOS, Android, and Windows. That is not necessarily all things that are out there. About 90% of it plus is either in the iOS or Android camp. When the A+ was being written, Windows was also a contender, though now the 15 people that still use it, not so much. It is kind of being phased out. There are very few devices that actually still utilize it, but for the purposes of the A+, we need to be aware of it. All right, some examples of mobile devices. In the past, you would have seen things like PDAs. You don't typically see those because those have kind of been integrated into our phones. Then we saw tablets, which are, becoming extremely common nowadays, becoming more common than actual computers at this point because of their functionality. So here's a list. It's obviously not inclusive, but it is a variety of ones that you can have. You have tablets, smartphones, wearable technology devices like your smartwatches, things like that. Google Glass, if anybody remembers those, are still trying to figure out a way to make something like that become more user-friendly or acceptable without having such a high creep factor. And then you have your e-readers, your smart cameras, your GPSs, phablets, which is that fun in between a phone and a tablet. Anybody ever see, if you see somebody carry like the large screen TV in their pocket, they hold it up their head, it's like the size of their face, and that's the phone. That is a phablet. It is in between a tablet and a phone. So is kind of a thing for a while there. It was like, how small could phones get, like from the Gordon Gecko brick all the way down to like really small phones to get in our pockets. And then we somehow changed it, and how big can your screen get? And that's how we got to the phablet world. So smartphones initiating with the iPhone, but then a lot of other companies jumped onto that bandwagon because it seemed to be where the industry was heading. So tablets. So early versions of it weren't anything like, computers or like they are today. Now they qualify as a mobile device due to the amount of technology that is integrated in them. Most of them run off of 3 OSs. You have the iOS, which is your iPads and things like that. You have your Android, which will run your Fire tablets, your Android tablets and things like that. And then you have Windows 8.1, although again, almost nobody uses that anymore. Most people really disliked the Windows with the tiles, but they are still out there. They have built-in cameras. They can vary drastically in size from relatively small to, gosh, like the more recent ones are almost like 12 inches point to point, and quite large and function almost like a full-blown computer. Relatively low in cost compared to the laptops of the same versions. I understand iPads are expensive as compared to a regular tablet, but an iPad versus an iMac, the iPad is significantly lower, and the tablet versus a Windows laptop is significantly lower. Many of them have built-in hand recognition, GPS, which we will get into GPS here in a little bit. They have solid state hard drives, as the magnetic ones, can't be jostled around that much and were easily damaged. I think Apple learned that with their first iterations of the iPods. They had magnetic drives in them. And if you dropped one at any significant height, like 2-3 feet, it would damage the hard drives internally and they would become little iBricks. 3 and 4G mobile support, although some will just have Wi-Fi. Touchscreens, and then an example of this would be the Microsoft Surface. All right, so many people think the tablets were a relatively recent invention, but actually the earliest one we have is 1972. That's probably one of the earliest tablets that were ever made. And then it wasn't until like the late 90s that you started seeing them become a lot more functional and widely accepted in the population. How big was that tablet? I don't know. You might be able to look it up. I think it was relatively large, but still fell into the tablet category, and even has like a QWERTY keyboard attached to it as well, if you see. So it even had a built-in keyboard on it. So it was, this one was relatively thick, although I think it was, I don't know, it's probably about 8 or 10 to 12 inches in length. It was rather chunky. All right, next, smartphones. So you have operating systems that run either iOS, which is the mobile operating system for Apple, Android, and then Windows. It has an on-screen keyboard to input data, and sometimes physical buttons for menu and go back, although those are being integrated out in the more recent iterations. Can use one or more SIM cards. Some of the Android phones were pretty slick, where if you had to have a work phone, you could actually put your work SIM into your phone, because it would allow for 2, and you can toggle between the 2. That way you wouldn't have to carry 2 devices, and you wouldn't have to use your personal SIM for your work, which is a really, really nice solution to that particular problem. because I like to keep perfect separation if I can. I don't like my work stuff on my private computers and my private phones, and I don't like my private stuff on my work computers. I keep that stuff as completely separate as possible. This obviously would be a bit of a different scenario as I'm literally working from my primary home computer. But there are other ways, security-wise, you can separate things. So, also, some allow for SD cards to extend memory capacity. This is strictly in the Android camp and possibly the Windows phones. Not so in the Apple camp. They like to upcharge for memory increase, and it is not something that can be done after the fact. I think we definitionally talk about eSIM. I don't think we go into detail about it. All right, the evolution of the mobile phone. As we can see, as we talked about here, you have the Motorola Gordon Gecko Special right here. About the size of a small cinder block, weighs almost as much. Very few people had these. They were very expensive at the time. I mean, I think my stepfather still has his. That was a satchel phone that was given to him by his company. Like, it literally was in a messenger bag over the shoulder that, you know, you would plug it into the car to recharge the battery. The thing was just massive. And that was the cell phone of the day at the time. I think he still has it. I got to get him to let me have that so I can use it as a display item for class. I'm sure he'll be happy to, you know, get it out of his garage. But then we moved into the Nokias, which everybody was familiar with. They kind of owned the market for a little while there. And then you can see the phones getting smaller, 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 smaller. And then we finally hit smartphone technology. And then it's bigger, 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 bigger until, you know, we get into the phablet categories. BlackBerry, you know, was a game changer there for a while. They had the direct connect communication where you could chirp somebody almost like a walkie-talkie no matter where they were. Really awesome for contractors and stuff like that, and drivers. Construction, it was a big thing. And then as well as integrating email into the phone. That was a real big game changer too. It's like almost every office professional, they were like, look, here, you can get your email wherever you are. That way you are never, ever disconnected from work. You are now 24/7. What, you want to be paid? No, we don't pay more for that. No, it's just, it's for your convenience. You can now be 24/7 connected to your work. And then we built into the iPhones. The first iteration was really rough. Most people jokingly called them the iBricks because they didn't really work that great. And then, you know, you get into the 2, 3, 4, and then 5 is where it really changed. They got the bigger screens, and then the evolution kept going. All right. Questions so far?
Yeah, what were beepers considered as?
Beepers? Those were, yeah, those really early mobile devices. I remember, yeah. You know, how many people had one? I had one.
So it is considered mobile?
It technically, yeah, it is considered a mobile device. That would be like that was pre cell phone. And for, I mean, the earliest, I mean, I don't know if you knew it, the earliest Blackberries were pagers. And they had keyboards on them where you could just send messages, text messages. That's all it was. You didn't have a phone, but you could send text messages on the little pager. Doctors loved them because it was quick ways to send messages to people and stuff like that. Right after 9/11, when 9/11 happened and all the cell phones, the cell towers were overwhelmed with people trying to call in and out of the island, almost nobody could get out on cell phones. But BlackBerry technology, almost nobody was using it. So people who had Blackberries could easily get messages in and out of the city. So that was kind of one of the things that put them on the map too. But yeah, pagers, yeah, they mostly were just, prior to the BlackBerry, they were just receiving devices. Like they would receive a message and that was it. And then you had to find a payphone and or a regular phone and call somebody out. I love trying to explain that to my kids now. Is like, you know, it used to be we didn't have these. You know, we actually had to drive around and look for a box on the side of the road and go over, and then you put money in, and then you made a phone call. And he thought that was the craziest thing. And eventually, I will find a payphone and show it to him and be like, "Look, I'm not crazy. See, here is one in physical form." But that was kind of how it was. Funny story, my cousin always had to carry 2 quarters with him because he could never remember his home phone number. So he'd have to call a friend, get them to tell him his home phone number, and then he could call home. That sums him up as a person right there. All right, wearable technology such as smart watches. These are really kind of changing the way we view technology. In many, many ways. These are not just communication devices. They're now becoming health devices, which is absolutely amazing. One of the earliest iterations of the Apple Watch was also supposed to read your blood pressure. But the thing was, is they couldn't get it to read it effectively enough or within a reasonable range. So they ended up scrapping that portion of it because you actually need that cuff, that collar, to be able to give you that accurate blood pressure reading. But it could read your heart rate. It could read possibly blood oxygenation levels, things like that, which could be useful for doctors. So you could actually keep records of this stuff, pass it on to your health provider, and many heart issues like murmurs and things like that have been detected by these fitness devices like Fitbits and the Apple Watches and the Pebble and all that stuff. So it's kind of neat how that's kind of integrating into our lives. They also have things like GPS features. If you're familiar with what a silver alert is, if you have, an elderly person who, yes, Karen.
Back to my crime shows. One of the Fitbits was actually used to clear a guy from being charged with murder because of the GPS technology on it. It tracked where he was at the time that his wife was killed. So it actually was a good thing too.
So there's your one instance where technology helped clear a person. But yeah, I've heard of a few cases where the GPS is helpful with those particular types of features. Obviously, you can get vibration alerts where it can tell you have a message or you're having a call or things like that. Vibration alerts, time display, so it can actually function like an original watch, which is more of a status symbol nowadays than an actual functional thing. And that was like one of the things that was interesting when cell phones started becoming more popular. The industry that never would have considered cell phones as competition was the watch manufacturers like Seiko and stuff like that. People stopped buying watches because they carried the watch in their pocket. And then so over time, watches became more of a status symbol than an actual necessity because everybody's got a smartphone. So you have a clock in your pocket. You don't need to wear a watch. So now it's more of a display piece. Some of them have micro USB input ports, so you can add extra functionality to it or applications. Some of them will allow you to use them like a remote for your TVs or for other devices. Sometimes, like if you want to take a picture, you can actually set up your phone, back up, and then use your watch to actually activate the camera on your phone to take a picture. So a lot of neat little functional things that they add to it.
Ellie, my wife and I actually just did that when we were taking like Christmas photos outside with their dog, and she realized that she could take the picture from her watch or like press the button to take it from the phone.
Okay.
So it actually is pretty handy.
Yes, it absolutely is. And you can actually get a preview of the picture on the watch too. So you can actually see if you're lined up good, and then you can snap the picture from your watch. So definitely a cool little add-on feature that they have. All right. So one of the biggest reasons they're being used mostly nowadays is for fitness monitoring and things like that, trackers. Oh, wait. Yeah, let me go back to this real quick. Sorry. So anti-lost alerts. As we were, I just mentioned silver alert, when somebody, who's elderly and, possibly has dementia, they may wander off, things like that. So you can actually utilize the the watch itself to kind of track the person. If they exit what's called a geofence, like a designated area, if they exit that area, it will send an alert to the caretaker, be it, their children or their husband or wife or the, the home or wherever they're staying. It can send an alert back to them and say, hey, such and such has exited at this point. So you can quickly recover the person before they get really lost. Because that is always sad when you see the silver alerts pop up where somebody has been lost. We just had one here in Jacksonville. Poor gentleman got lost downtown, and it took him about 5 or 6 hours to find him. But the GPS on the watches actually help locate the people much faster with the anti-lost alerts. All right. So typically they don't have enough memory on a lot of these devices to store all the information that you're gathering with regards to health and all that stuff. So it needs to be paired up with some other larger device like a phone, and then it would do data dumps to there, and the phone would actually be the storing device. And even if you separate the two, like if you leave your phone in your car, go for a run, when you come back, then it relinks and syncs down the data from your exercise. All right. Some of them have additional things that they can read from, like you can have the chest straps for a more accurate heart read than just going off of your wrist. Like, I don't know if if anybody out there has one of the like the Fitbits or something like that. Sometimes you're doing exercises where you're pushing and pulling, where your wrists go at odd angles, you won't get an accurate heart read. So you'll sit there and be doing like push-ups, and darn well your heart rate is much higher. Then all of a sudden it's reading in the 20s. And you're like, I wish my heart rate was down in the 20s right now. But so changing the angle of your wrist can affect it. So you can pair it up with chest straps and things like that. So there's many manufacturers of these particular things. You got your Fitbits, you got your Nike makes one, Polar, Microsoft, Apple, obviously. Fitbit is hands down the most popular of all of them with regards to fitness trackers. Does somebody have their hand up?
Well, it was more like you said, 20 beats per second. I was like, you gotta be like some yogi to have that kind of heartbeat. Like,
yeah, to have like 20 beats per minute.
Yo, like that's insane. Yeah, like you gotta be on some other level.
Yeah.
No, there are people actually, I think the lowest that's been recorded, I think it was like 40.
No, resting heart rates can be much lower than that.
Well, no, the one that I'm saying in regards to somebody said something on that you're dead. I was like, no, you're not dead. The one that I read was 40, but I know there's other tests out there. I just haven't read them extensively, but they're out there.
Well, my father, who was like a big cardio person like his whole life, distance runner, like when he's resting, like if he's just sitting down watching TV or something like that, his heart rate's around 38. Like it's nuts. So when if he's just sitting there and he'll slowly roll his wrist and look, he's sitting at about 38. Yes, Vinkata.
I heard for athletes it will be little bit low.
If you what?
For athletes, for who are
athletes, their heart rate's going to be much lower. Yes.
Yeah.
Their resting heart rate. Yes. You are absolutely correct on that. But there are like some anesthesias that will put your heart rate like a couple beats a minute. Tetrodotoxin is a big one for that, which is why they liked it for anesthesia. You'll get down to like 1 or 2 beats a minute on your heart, and it's crazy.
What I was referring to is actually being awake, like not so much being under, but like the person actually is very conscious, just up and about.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
up and about. Yeah, 40 would be super low.
Yeah, like I'll find it. I don't know. I have it somewhere in my list of things.
Yeah, but this is like, like my father, that's like him sitting in a chair doing nothing, not moving, just kind of watching something, and then his heart rate will drop to about 38. All right. Other stuff you'll see, you have these headsets. that can respond to voice and body movements and commands, which is kind of neat. So they can actually, react to that. And then you have the Google Glass, which was this one here. It was a really interesting technology, kind of played a little bit into the augmented reality. It could display things for you to be able to read and allow you to interact with the world. Except the problem was with this particular camera here, it had a very high creep factor. People didn't want to be recorded. So a lot of places, they wouldn't even allow these devices in. Because people were going in and recording movies and bootlegging movies using their Google Glass, or you would go into restaurants and stuff and they wouldn't want you to record in there. So there were issues with it that we're going to have to overcome if something like this is going to be functional, maybe utilizing infrared cameras or something along those lines rather than an actual like HD camera. I'm not sure. They keep trying to figure it out, but again, you got to get over what, loosely referred to as the creep factor on it. So, all right. Well, they let you record that because it's more obvious. DW, that's why it's like it's more obvious you're recording versus having a device. And this is not just recording, it's computing. So, while you're recording, it could be running statistics. There's other things you can program it to do rather than just specifically record. So that's where the casinos would have problems with these. All right, other mobile devices. The infamous phablet. When the display size gets to around like north of 7 inches, that is when they call it a phablet. If it barely fits in your hand and is the size of your head when you're putting it up there, it is likely a phablet if that is your phone you're carrying around in your pocket. And then the others we have is the e-readers, which is like the Kindles and the Nooks and things like that. More so the older ones that had the Paperwhite technology, which was really wonderful. They had exceedingly long battery lives because the only time battery was being used was when you were changing pages and realigning the molecules in the screen. That was the only time any battery power was being used. So they would have really, really long battery lives due to low usage for the original e-readers. All right, questions so far with regards to these? All right, next. Smart cameras. These would be your point and shoots and your DSLRs, things like that. For it to be considered a smart camera, needs to have the digital screen on the back to actually be considered a smart camera. So these are cameras that can extract information from the images they take and then make decisions on what is extracted. Some of them would have biometric recognition, code reading, some other verification features. Other of them will add GPS metadata and all that kind of stuff into the photos itself. And then you get into GPS, or Global Positioning System. So the way GPS works is, let me get my annotator here. This is a very, very basic course on it. So here is my absolutely horrible stick figure person with their, little GPS device. I'm not drawing anymore. There we go. Little GPS device. And the GPS itself is a receiver only. how it works is it needs to be able to link up with at least 3 satellites that are up there, 3 GPS satellites, in order to get a position. So these satellites are sending out basically like pulses, like pings in a regular interval. And it would have to receive pulses from at least 3 satellites. If it receives pulses from 3 satellites, it can tell exactly where you're located. I think it's within like 10 feet or something like that, or 20 feet. Unfortunately, to get more accurate than that, the military does not allow it, actually. The government and the military do not allow you to be more accurate than 20 feet. So, yes, satellites from space. So there are a total of 31 satellites that make up the GPS system, and I believe 22 are active. So of the 31 that are up there, 22 are active. That way, if one goes down, one of the others can move into position and replace it pretty quickly. All the calculations for where you are located are based in the receiver inside the GPS. These satellites do not tell you where you are. All they do is send out little beeps. The GPS device you're holding calculates your position based on the beeps it's receiving. So 3 satellites tell you your longitude and latitude. If you can get a 4th satellite, it will tell you your height, your altitude. So 3 for longitude and latitude, 4th gives you altitude. And just remember, the satellites themselves don't do any calculations. All they do is send out beeps. The calculations are made in the GPS, which tell you where you are. Now, devices like, I'll get to you in just 1 second there, DW. Devices like your phone have built-in GPS receivers in them and will record that data over time, so you can tell where you are at any given time. Yes, DW.
As far as the satellites, are they owned by individual companies? Are they owned by the government? Like, do different countries have different ones?
Specifically, GPS is owned by the US government. There are other governments like the EU, China, I think Turkey. There's like 10 or 12 different types of the GPS. India has their own. There are 10 or 12 different types of GPS. They go by different names. They have different numbers of satellites. You don't need to know all that unless you go for your Network Plus, and then you'll actually have to know which ones, have how many satellites, who do they associate with. But the GPS system is owned by the US government.
So just a hypothetical, let's say we're developing an app and we want it to have GPS capabilities. Do we have to coordinate that with the US government then?
No, because the phone you have is a US-based phone. That technology, remember, so inside you have a GPS receiver. That receiver itself makes the calculations based off of your satellite technology. Even if you go to Europe and stuff like that, you're still basing off of that US phone. Now, the reason why the governments like the EU and Turkey and India and all that stuff may have different ones is, again, when we're talking about the accuracy, getting below 20 feet or 10 feet or whatever it is, that accuracy is what they're going for. They want it within inches. So that is that proprietary stuff that even we, as civilians, we wouldn't get that information. So they would build their own GPS type systems in order to gain that accuracy. I don't think Canada has their own. I think they operate off of ours. So yes, Karen.
I don't know if you said it or I just didn't hear. And those are the ones that go up by the space by NASA that sends them up, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they're not very big. Because they
Okay.
have a very simple purpose. Their sole purpose is just to literally just send out beeps. That's all they do. They have to be in geosync orbit, which means they don't move. So they're
Okay.
positioned in a specific spot in space and they just beep.
Okay. And the
And then
beep
based
kind of
on
like Morse code, like
kind of like each beep would be unique to each satellite.
okay.
And so based off of which beeps you're receiving and how long it takes those beeps to get to you,
Oh, determines your
that would be
position.
how it would determine your physical location.
Okay. Okay.
So you may be asking yourself what, and they operate off of line of sight. So you actually have to have visibility, like a satellite dish. So you may be asking yourself, how do we do this in the city? You get big buildings all the way around you. You don't have enough, access to the whole sky to get 3 satellites from different points, right? Yes, Cynthia.
The buildings themselves have like antennas on top of on the roof. So like well, the Twin Towers had it at one point, but like Freedom does it. Other buildings, the Chrysler, they all have antennas, so that's how they're able to talk to one another, and we're able to be on the ground level with our cell phones.
Yes, what it is cellular assisted GPS is what it comes down to. So you're actually using cell towers or these repeater towers on buildings, and they can get you a better approximation of where you are so that your GPS works for getting directions in, on your phone, driving directions. So you're utilizing the GPS for that. If you're in a city where you don't have full sky coverage, you can use 1 or 2 satellites plus a cellular tower or a relay tower on one of the bigger buildings. And so with that, they can get a better approximation of where you are and you're good. All right. Questions so far? Okay, so common characteristics among mobile devices. Screens, they all have screens, including digital cameras. Even they have screens to be considered a mobile devices. Most tablets use a type of LCD panel. Less expensive use the all-important twisted pneumatic. More expensive use the IPS or in-plane switching. And they're moving more towards the OLEDs because they have much better resolution, crisper images, and a better technology. Now, almost all devices utilize a touch screen. And there are 2 different types of touch screens. So we have the old school type, which is called resistive, which reacts to pressure. So these would be like the signing pads that you had for credit cards, like when you're at the grocery store and they ask you to sign. That is resistive. It's going based off of the pressure you're applying to the screen themselves. The other type, which is the most common you'll see nowadays, is called capacitive touch. And it is a little more sensitive. It does not require ongoing calibration. Resistive needs to be calibrated on a very regular basis. Capacitive does not. But capacitive does not pick up all types of touches. Like if you have gloves on, you notice sometimes in wintertime you have gloves on and you try to turn on your screen, it doesn't work. It doesn't pick up on it because it uses capacitors in there to complete the electrical charge. Your skin is able to transmit that. So if you want to wear gloves, you actually have to buy special smartphone capable gloves. They have that little, those little diodes on the tips of the fingers that basically is just almost like a wire going through the glove that touches your finger so that conductivity can pass through and you can actually use your phone, unlike if you're just wearing like wool mittens or something like that. Questions Very important to know the difference between resistive and capacitive.
I got a question.
Go for it.
So for capacitive touchscreen, would that be like OLED or TN LCD?
Well, that would be like almost every smartphone you have. That is a capacitive touch. Resistive is like the old school, like the UPS signing pads. So those tablets they have, you have to sign your name when you get a package. That's resistive, where you're having to sign it. It's going off of the pressure of your hand on there, not even the lightest touch. And the capacitive is based off of the conductivity of whatever's touching it. And they auto calibrate every time you turn them on. So it's really nice. Yes, Cynthia.
For the panel, the actual screen, for the capacitive touch screens, would that be considered more for like the twisted pneumatic technology, where you actually need something to work really quickly versus the old school stuff, which would be, or maybe I could be wrong. I mean, I'm just trying to see how that correlates in the real world. Like how.
No, I mean, I get where you're going with that. And the thing is both IPS and twisted pneumatic would use capacitive for the most part. Resistive, you're typically going to see on much older types of devices. And that's why I refer to, like, when you sign for, the credit card things at like the grocery store or whatever, they have that little gray strip that you have to like put the little pin on and sign it or whatever. That is a capacitive touch. They're starting to replace those with the newer, excuse me, that was a resistive touch because the pressure of the pen. They're starting to replace them with the capacitive touches nowadays. So capacitive or resistive touch didn't work as well, worked off of pressure, needed to be calibrated more frequently. Capacitive touch auto calibrates, much lighter touch. They last longer. All right. DW.
I got a little something that ties kind of all of this together. So my first job ever, I worked for Kodak at the top of the rock here in New York City, and my job was to take pictures with a smart camera, and those pictures would go through a PDA that had a resistive touchscreen that we had to use a stylus for. And then the way that we got those pictures into the thing was that they were beamed pretty much through whatever the network, we were using the wireless network, down into the server, downstairs into the gift shop where we would sell those things. And they were so hard to use because they had to be calibrated like every 20 minutes or something like that.
Yeah.
And when you're 75 feet up in the middle of winter, you can't, it's hard to keep your hands out, and I use gloves and stuff like that. So if you lost that stylus, you were pretty much toast.
Yeah.
And I have a question actually about the twisted pneumatic. Do OLEDs also use twisted pneumatic, or is it just for like old school LCD?
I believe the OLEDs are typically IPS.
Okay.
And when you start getting into the OLED technology, this is where even in the gaming world, the IPS is starting to compete with the twisted pneumatics. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting close. Yes, Cynthia.
I know the plasma is old technology, but would that be considered an IPS because of the richness and the quality of the colors on the plasma? I know it's old technology, but
yeah, I'm trying to think if it would technically be considered that, because if I remember on the old plasmas, that was where, like, if you would get offline, like off center, you would get the dark screens. I don't want to misinform. Avery, can you possibly get the answer on that one, like with our coworker Google?
I'm looking to see what I can find.
thank you, Avery.
I don't want to misinform on that one. I don't know the answer to that. All right. See here. Next, other common characteristics among mobile devices. Many mobile devices have cameras, both front and rear facing. Now we're in a camera war where they're trying to see how many cameras they can add to the back of a cell phone and still make it functional and usable and things like that. I think the most I saw, there was this amazing point and shoot camera that had like 19 cameras on what was almost like a smartphone, and then it had 19 little lenses on the back of it. You took one picture and it pretty much got a three-dimensional image. It got you black and whites, full raw video. I mean, it's got everything in one fell swoop. And it allowed for an amazing amount of back office editing for the photos for just a point and shoot camera. But now I think we're up to what, almost 4? Is it 4 or is it 3 on the backs of like the newer cameras? I know the 12, the iPhone 12 had 3. Was it? Has 3 in the back. Well, I mean, I guess you could say it's 4 because they have 3 in the back, 1 in the front for the 12. I'm guessing it's because of if you look at the cameras on the back, they have a much larger oculus or opening versus the tiny speck that is on the front of your phone. And that's probably why it is a much smaller camera to fit in a much smaller surface area. So they can only get so much with regards to the pixels per, inch or whatever on it. And the back cameras are much more detailed. Yes, Cynthia.
For the smart cameras, is the technology on the screen also, that would be considered capacitive, and would that also be considered an IPS?
On the
Smart cameras?
on like the DSLRs and stuff?
Yeah, the ones that you could, like the screen is on the back.
Yes, that would be considered an IPS typically.
Thank you.
Because you wouldn't be worried so much about the refresh rate on the camera, because the actual screen itself is not going to be the determining factor of your ability, like how fast you can take pictures. It's the read and write capability from the camera to the card that's usually the bottleneck on
that's what I was trying
shots.
to figure out. Right, that's what helps me like actually categorize what an IP is in the real world and what is the pneumatics in, for the gaming and high quality, fast moving.
Well, I mean, understand for like the gaming thing, you're getting lower graphics quality for Twisted Pneumatic. It is lower quality.
Right, gaming is okay, right? Because gaming,
the refresh rate is faster.
Faster, right?
It's lower quality, but like the refresh rate is so much faster so that they're able to react better.
Makes sense.
So like when you start getting into the high-end gaming and stuff like that, that becomes a lot more important. When you're playing Super Mario Brothers, not so important. I've never really had an issue with whatever monitor I'm playing on. You get into Metroid, it starts to become a little more important.
Thank you.
Not a problem. All right. So microphones typically built in, obviously very, very strong requirement on a phone. So you'd be able to actually use it as a phone. GPS built into most smart devices, even your smart cameras and things like that. It's become pretty much a requirement for many devices because a lot of applications and stuff build upon that. That's funny. All right, other common characteristics among mobile devices: internal storage. It has to have a way to store the information it's receiving and computing. See here, so it typically uses solid state drives. Most common being the eMMC because of its low power consumption. And it can easily be integrated with the motherboard itself. A lot of devices allow for expandable memory, unless it has a little Apple on the back of it. They don't like that. So you can use micro SDs or SDs to actually expand the memory of a device like that. Android has always been pretty wonderful about that, where you can add a ton of memory to an Android phone just because of that micro SD slot. All right, any other questions other than with regards to beards, why everybody trimmed their beards over the weekend? So, all right. Got a little quiz for everybody here real quick. Go ahead and pause the recording.